Hey guys, here I am again, and from my couch this time at night. And I just want to show you guys. If you thought I was kidding about my love of art, my prized Marc Chagall print. He's a good artist. Look him up. Okay, well, I promised you guys something. I promised you World War One. Total bummer that it's not going to be on the test, but World War One is maybe one of the most fascinating things that has ever happened in the world, except for maybe a pandemic in which everyone is forced to just sit at home. But that being said, World War One is definitely way more. It had a lot of drama. And it's very exciting. It's very tragic, and it's something that I think we can learn a lot from, especially when it comes to things like leadership and patriotism, loyalty. All these hard lessons had to be learned during World War One. So hopefully you saw my lecture on the lead up to World War One. If you didn't, it's here in my website. So I've put everything here once again. So here's the website. And I am going to direct you guys to this one later on. I highly recommend you watch the History of World War One History Bomb once again, as well as the shell shock video, which I said was graphic. The Russian Revolution documentary is a good one. And I put my COVID-19 distance learning lectures, I'm putting them here. This is the one on the Balkan crises and the Bismarckian system, which is where we learn about how the ball got rolling towards World War One. Oh, look, there I am again. Okay, before I start though, I am going to direct you to a funny little story. I'm going to post this link on my website and in Google Classroom so you can read it. But first, I'm going to read you a story called If World War One Was a Bar Fight. So I have it here, this little link, and it's brilliant. You guys should really look at the If World War II Was a Bar Fight one too. But many times people have explained World War One as if it were just a big brawl that was like senseless and no one even knows why anyone's fighting anyone. So I'll start reading it to you guys. You follow along. Germany, Austria, and Italy are standing together in the middle of a pub when Serbia bumps into Austria and spills Austria's pint. Austria demands Serbia buy it a whole new suit because of the new beer stains on its trouser leg. Germany expresses its support for Austria's point of view. Britain recommends that everyone just calm down a bit. Serbia points out that it can't afford a whole suit, but it does offer to pay for the cleaning of Austria's trousers. Russia and Serbia look at Austria. Austria asks Serbia who it's looking at. Russia suggests that Austria should leave its little brother alone. Austria inquires as to whose army will assist Russia in doing so. Germany appeals to Britain that France has been looking at it and that it's sufficiently out of order that Britain not intervene. Britain replies that France can look at who it wants to, that Britain is looking at Germany too, and just what is Germany going to do about it? Germany tells Russia to stop looking at Austria or Germany will render Russia incapable of such action anymore. Britain and France ask Germany whether it's looking at Belgium. Turkey and Germany go off into a corner and whisper. When they come back, Turkey makes a show of not looking at anyone. Germany rolls up its sleeves, looks at France, and punches Belgium, of all countries. France and Britain punch Germany. Austria punches Russia. Germany punches Britain and France with one hand and Russia with the other. Russia throws a punch at Germany, but misses and nearly falls over. Japan calls over from the other side of the room that it's on Britain's side, but it stays over there. Italy surprises everyone by suddenly punching Austria. Australia punches Turkey and gets punched back. There are no hard feelings because Britain made Australia do it. France gets thrown through a plate glass window, but gets back up and carries on fighting. Russia gets thrown through another one, gets knocked out, suffers brain damage, and wakes up with a complete personality change. Italy throws a punch at Austria and misses, but Austria falls over anyway. Italy raises both fists in the air and runs around the room chanting. America waits till Germany is about to fall over from sustained punching from Britain and France, then walks over and smashes it with a bar stool, and then pretends it won the fight all by itself. By now, all the chairs are broken, and the big mirror over the bar is shattered. Britain, France, and America agree that Germany threw the first punch, so the whole thing is Germany's fault. While Germany is still unconscious, they go through its pockets, steal its wallet, and buy drinks for all their friends. Okay, if you thought that story was funny, then congratulations, you understand World War One. If you don't get it yet, don't worry, you will. And you're going to have to go back and reread it just to make sure you really understand. There are a lot of metaphors in there for how this war goes down. So let's start, and I want to explain how the war actually got started. As I said in my last lecture, World War One started because one man got assassinated. Can you imagine a world war where millions of people die and it started over a single man being assassinated? You probably can't imagine it, and the truth is, it's a lot more complicated than that. What set it off was an assassination, but the causes had been a long time coming. I like to explain that World War One was sort of like where, if you can imagine your kitchen and there's a gas leak, and it's been leaking all day, and you can definitely smell the gas and you know it's there, but then you go and do something really stupid and you light a match. What happens? Massive explosion. Well, my last lecture explains all of the gas that had been leaking in Europe for all this time. The Balkan crises and the Bismarckian system had been causing a lot of tension, and so had imperialism, nationalism, alliances, militarism, and all these other isms. But the assassination of the Archduke was the spark, the match that was lit, and it causes this massive war. So take a look at this picture. It shows soldiers at the Battle of the Somme, preparing to advance in northern France. These are British infantrymen. They are inside of a trench. World War One was a trench war, meaning that it was literally fought mostly from trenches. Trenches are giant ditches that you stand in. I will explain a little bit later why World War One was a trench war. For future reference, don't ever fight a trench war. It is the worst kind of war you can fight and nobody wins. So, in all seriousness, let's go back. I showed you guys this image last time in the last lecture on the Balkan crises. Remember, we said that the Balkans was the powder keg of Europe. And Bismarck himself had known that, and he had called it 20 years before the war even started. He said, one day the great European war will come out of some damned foolish thing in the Balkans. So, if you're taking notes, class, I want you guys to write this down. This is an important one. The main causes of World War One. World War One has several causes. It didn't actually start because one man got assassinated. That's just what set it off. The causes were militarism. That is the glorification of the military. Don't forget, this is coming straight out of the Industrial Revolution. And what was created during the Industrial Revolution was a whole bunch of industrialized weapons, machine guns, chemical weapons, tanks, even airplanes, submarines. The Industrial Revolution provided the technology that militaries wanted. And the more they had, the more their neighboring countries wanted even bigger and better guns and weapons. And because of that, the military itself was glorified as this great symbol of industrial prowess and strength. Alliances. So we talked last time about how these alliances were formed. The Central Powers, which were in the center of Europe, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, versus the Allies, Britain, France, and Russia. Other countries were involved as well, but these were the two main alliances that started it all. I is for imperialism. Now, we've talked a lot about imperialism if you've watched my last few lectures, especially the rivalry and competition over colonies in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. In particular, led many countries to have hard feelings against each other. This is especially the case with, for example, Germany and Italy being somewhat jealous of the colonies that Britain and France had in Africa and parts of the Middle East and Asia. And lastly, nationalism. This is the big one. World War One was actually a war that was fought over nationalism. Nationalism is, of course, an extreme pride and patriotism in one's country. It's a way of showcasing your country's strength, and it's also the desire that many states had that many states wanted to have a state that was simply just for their ethnic nationality people. For example, having a Germany that was for Germans, having Croatia, that was just for Croatians, having Bosnia, that was just for the Bosnians, a Slavic country that was only for the Slavs. And also, this also causes blaming of others or outsiders for problems. You can see how World War I is going to be a major precursor to World War II because of this. So let me expand on these a little bit. In nationalism, remember, there was like a whole system of new nation states that were just being born. I mean, you have Italy and Germany in the 1870s, but then because of those Balkan crises, you had new countries like Bulgaria and Serbia, Montenegro, these new countries like Albania and Macedonia. And these countries are competing with each other instead of cooperating with each other. And because of that, and also because of the alliances that are formed due to these new countries in competition, something very dangerous was actually happening in Europe. We call this the diplomacy of brinksmanship. We're going to talk about this again when we get to the Cold War. So write this one down, kids. What is brinksmanship? Brinksmanship is the diplomatic practice of constantly being on the brink of war. Like, imagine two countries that have a conflict with each other, and the conflict escalates constantly, and they even threaten to go to war with each other, and they just about almost do, and then finally, at the last minute, something happens to de escalate the situation, and they don't go to war. Like, someone negotiates some sort of last minute treaty, and it calms things down. This was how countries had been operating in Europe for several years, especially since the 1870s, which was not only the height of European imperialism and competition, but also the incoming of two great new powerful states in Europe, Germany and Italy. So brinksmanship is also a major feature of the Cold War, by the way, so it's not going anywhere anytime soon. In fact, the entire 20th century was marked by quite a bit of brinksmanship and then quite a bit of actual war as well. There's also another example of nationalism is the French resentment over Alsace and Lorraine. Remember, the French were very angry and upset with Germany over the fact that Germany had taken Alsace and Lorraine, those two regions of France on the border with Germany, in the Franco-Prussian War, and Germany had really rubbed it in when they then forced France to sign that treaty in the Palace of Versailles Hall of Mirrors. So this was still a very sore point for France. And they were itching to get Alsace and Lorraine back. They just wanted an excuse. They wanted a reason. They were looking for a reason to fight Germany and get a chance to get those regions back. Also, remember, Russia supports pan-Slavism. We talked about this in the last lecture as well. Russia wants all Slavic countries to be united under one nation, one flag, so that Slavic nations in the Balkans no longer can get picked on or invaded by countries like Austria or the Ottoman Empire. Many countries also had a lot of internal dissent. I mean, you look at Austria and Hungary, Bulgaria, most of the Balkans, even Germany and Italy itself. There's a lot of really dissatisfied minorities. The labor force, the workers themselves were also very dissatisfied with the way things were going. So you have a lot of just internal dissent inside, within each country. Nothing brings people together like a war. Militarism, I already went over. Not only were countries creating these large industrial weapons, but they were gaining massive armies and they were conscripting soldiers. That means drafting soldiers. This was a practice that started, remember, during the French Revolution, when the French first started the levée en masse, which was the first major military draft. Also, military leaders were becoming incredibly influential. This is a trend that really goes back to Bismarck. Bismarck himself was a military leader. He was a Junker in Germany. We start to see that military leaders actually seem to have more authority and more power in countries than presidents, prime ministers, or kings. And military plans were not very flexible. When the military said that they were going to increase their numbers, increase their weapons, they did so, and it really didn't matter what the rest of the government thought. The military would just do what it wanted. That was also a trend that was largely set by Bismarck. I don't think he intended for World War I to break out. Remember, he doesn't even like war, especially since it doesn't work out very good for Germany in the end. So once again, here's a reminder of what Europe looks like in 1914. Notice you've got Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy in the middle, right? The center of Europe, the central powers. But they are surrounded, framed by the other alliance on either side. So Germany is actually facing one enemy in the east and one enemy in the west. You've got Russia to the east, France to the west, and Great Britain just across the channel. Okay, so how does this all break out? The Balkan Wars had actually just ended a year before this, but in the summer of 1914, things got pretty heated in the Balkans. This time in the country of Bosnia, specifically the capital city of Sarajevo. So there were all these pre-existing tensions and rivalries, which I talked about, right? The Balkan crises, the fact that the Balkans had been this powder keg of Europe, and Serbia was very angry at Austria for oppressing the Balkans and getting involved in their affairs and getting in the way of what they wanted in the Balkans. So there was just a lot of mutual distrust and hatred for all these competing powers. You got Russia and Austria-Hungary and Serbia. They each want to control what's happening in the Balkans. So, for reasons I don't quite understand why he thought this was a good idea at this time, the Archduke of Austria, his name was Francis Ferdinand, he and his wife Sophia decided that they were going to visit Bosnia on a state visit, like an official visit. And so they go for a little parade in the capital city where they're going to wave to the citizens. This happened on June 28th, 1914. The Archduke and his wife were riding in an open-air vehicle in the back seat, very similar to the way JFK had ridden in his vehicle. And there was a group of freedom fighters, or if you're Austrian, you might call them terrorists. And they were known, the Austrians called them the Black Hand. And they were known for having, oh, my dog has decided to make an appearance. Say hi, Izzy. Izzy. Oh, okay. So, Izzy, move. You're like totally in the way. So, anyway, they're on this parade, and all of a sudden, the car decides to, for some reason, switch directions. And the plan had been to actually originally throw a bomb at them. But when the car decides to suddenly switch its route, a young teenager, an 18-year-old member of this terrorist organization, his name was Gavrilo Princip. He decides to follow them and hastily shoots them both in the head and kills them both. Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophia were murdered, assassinated, right there on the streets of Bosnia, of Sarajevo. Well, this causes a massive uproar, as you can tell, and Austria is outraged and they want an answer, they want revenge. So the Austrians decide that they're going to give Serbia an ultimatum. The ultimatum essentially was, if you do not track down every single person that was responsible for this, we are going to go to war. They also made all kinds of other demands that Serbia at the time saw as practically impossible. After all, this organization that was responsible for the assassination was so widespread. I mean, there's so much hatred in the Balkans for Austria. What could the Serbian government possibly really do? So Serbia responds back by saying, "Hey, we've got the guy who did it, and we'll execute him and his companions that day. But we can't go, start like wage war on our own citizens for this." Austria looks to Germany and says, "Hey, you guys need to back us up." So Germany decides to give a pledge of full support to Austria. Essentially, this is a blank check. Germany just tells Austria, whatever you need, we have your back. So this is, at this point, declarations of war start to come out. But I want to, I'm going to go through like a more detailed chain of events here. So like I said, on June 28th, 1914, Ferdinand is assassinated in Sarajevo by Gavrilo Princip. He's a member of the Black Hand. I should also state, by the way, that only the Austrians called them the Black Hand because that's like a very sinister name. In Serbia, they were actually known as Unity or Death, which is really much more of like a patriotic name, which is interesting. Terrorists don't think they're terrorists; they're freedom fighters, and in a way, they were. These guys were asking for freedom from Austrian oppression. So Austria issues this ridiculous ultimatum. Serbia rejects most of it because it wants to preserve its autonomy, and does not believe that Austria has any right to come into their country and invade it just because of this assassination. Germany offers Austria this blank check, right? This says, hey, we're going to support you. So if you want to go to war with Austria, we're with you all the way. On July 28th, exactly 1 month later, Austria decides to declare war on Serbia. This causes a chain reaction to suddenly take place. Don't forget, Serbia has a powerful big brother, Russia, because of the Slavic connection. Okay? Now, on July 29th, the very next day, Tsar Nicholas II orders his military to mobilize. That means to get ready for war. But I need to explain something interesting here. Tsar Nicholas II and Kaiser William of Germany are cousins. Not only that, but they have actually always been friendly with each other. In fact, they called each other Nicky and Willie. Those were their nicknames for each other. And that entire day of July 28th to July 29th, they had been sending each other telegrams back and forth explaining what they thought they needed to do. These are notoriously known now as the Nicky Willie telegrams. When Tsar Nicholas orders his military to mobilize, he doesn't think anything's going to happen. He does not believe his own cousin, who's actually his cousin through his wife, Alexandra, who is actually his first cousin, the first cousin with William. Nicholas does not believe that his own cousin would declare war on him. He does this more because he thinks it needs to be a formality to show Serbia that they have their support. Nicholas is shocked when William of Germany immediately declares war on him. He's like, what? You're my cousin. You can't declare war on me. He didn't think it was actually going to happen, but it did. And stupidly, Nicholas had actually ignored the advice of his advisors. His advisors warned him over and over again, do not mobilize. Your cousin will declare war. Nicholas said, nonsense. He's my cousin. He loves me. We're all good. And then he declared war. So Nicholas is totally surprised. As a result, when Austria then declares war, or Germany, I'm sorry, on August 1st, Germany declares war on Russia, right? This is William declaring war. 2 days later, Germany decides to preemptively declare war on France because Germany, thinking ahead, realizes that Russia will appeal to its ally, France. France is itching for a fight with Germany anyway at this point. So Germany decides to one-up them, and they declare war on France first. But in order to declare war on France, stay with me here, guys, this one gets kind of complicated. This would require a plan, because remember, France is on one side of Germany, Russia is on the other. And Bismarck knew that this could one day be a possibility, that Germany would find itself on a two-front war, fighting essentially with one hand fighting France and one hand fighting Russia. So, to prepare for this, they had actually come up with a plan way back in 1894 called the Schlieffen Plan. It's right up here, named after the guy who came up with it. Okay, this basically means that the Germans figured Russia would be slow to mobilize because Russia is a little bit backwards at this time. They don't have the technology that Germany has. Russia's also really, really big. They just figured that the Russian troops would be slow, and they would, even if they did go to war, it would be months before the Russians actually got to them. So they would send minimal troops to Russia, thinking, of course, Russia would be slow. And in the meantime, they would quickly go west and invade France. But they would actually surprise the French by, rather than going right through the border at the Rhineland, they would actually march north through Belgium, through the forest that they thought was impenetrable, the Ardennes forest, and then come north, go into the north of France, swing around to the south, and surround Paris. I'll show you a map in just a second. Because the French would be busy trying to defend the border at the Rhineland, they wouldn't be able to defend Paris. They figured they could simply crush Paris, swing to the east. Once they had Paris crushed and under their thumb, they would simply swing back to the east. They would defeat Russia, and like a 1-2 punch, they would just be done. They figured they would be home by Christmas. It was a flawless plan, but not so. Here's a map. This is what I mean. As you guys can see, if you can follow my cursor here, here is Germany. Russia is all the way over here to the east. And Germany thinks that if they get involved in this plan, they need to first, before they actually bother with the Russians, whom they assumed would be slow, they're going to first, instead of coming down here, right, the French were expecting them to come through here, the border between France and Germany. But instead, the Germans decide they're going to try to surprise the French by marching north through Belgium, swinging down this way, and taking Paris. Then once they had Paris surrounded and crushed, swing back to the east and easily defeat those supposedly slow Russians. It did not work out that way. The Germans made a fatal error. They underestimated their enemies. Turns out, not only are the Russians a lot faster at mobilizing than he gave them credit for, but Belgium has friends, powerful friends in Europe. And the march through Belgium was absolutely brutal. The Germans were pretty savage in their conquest of Belgium as they marched through on their way to France. Many Belgian citizens died defending their country against the German invasion. But something else to remember, Belgium was neutral. This was an agreement that had been made back in 1839 in exchange for Belgium's independence. Okay, now we go back to the time of Romanticism. Remember the 1830 revolutions when Belgium actually won its independence from the Netherlands? Well, in exchange for its independence, the rest of Europe agreed it could have its independence so long as it remained neutral. Belgium then promised to protect Belgium in case of an invasion. In exchange for their neutrality, Britain swore to protect Belgium at all costs. So now they're here to pay their debts. On August 4th, just the day after, Britain declares war on Germany. So now all of Europe is at war, practically. Okay, the chain of events, the alliances have come into play. The chain of events is now complete for the most part. So I have a question for you guys. Think about it for a second. Do you think Britain might have had other motives for entering the war? Was it really simply just to protect Belgium? Certainly, the Belgians were having a hell of a time defending themselves against the German invasion, and the British would not have stood for this. However, think about it. What would have happened if Germany and Austria had won and Britain had remained neutral? What do you think would have become of Britain? It would have been alienated, much like Austria was, and would have been without friends. That would have been disastrous for Britain. So Britain, being the country that likes to stay neutral most of the time, Britain doesn't like to get involved in Europe's drama with the whole, even now today with the whole Brexit thing. But this time, Britain had to move to action. So there you have it. There's your chain of events. Now all of Europe is at war. I want to go back to this picture, to the picture of the soldiers in the trenches. Come up with a better way to do this. The picture of the soldiers in the trenches, as you guys saw, this is an important question because you might be wondering, if a trench war is so horrible, why fight one? Well, nobody wanted it this way. The problem is that much of the war was fought on the Western Front in Belgium and northern France because of where they got stuck. Okay, look at this map one more time. If you look right here, okay, because of the Schlieffen Plan, The Germans come and march through Belgium, and they are on their way to Paris. But before they could get to Paris, the British have arrived just in time. The Belgians have mobilized their forces, and so have the French. So they stopped the Germans here, and the Germans realize they hadn't really counted on British involvement. So they are stuck. The Germans cannot move forward anymore. So much of the war takes place right here as both sides try to penetrate the other. But there's a problem. This land is flat, and much of it below sea level. There are very little mountains and trees to hide behind. There's forest, but much of it gets cleared during the war. Most of it is just farmland. So here's a question for you. If you have bullets flying at you, and you can't hide behind any trees or mountains or hills, and the bullets are flying at you very fast, you can't go forward, you can't retreat, you can't really go east or west, where do you go? The only answer is you dig a hole in the ground and you get inside of it. That's your only cover from the bullets. That's how World War I became a trench war. And then you're really stuck, because then how do you get out of that trench? Every time you get out of that trench, you're going to have bullets flying at you. This is why World War I was such a detrimental war, and nothing was gained out of it. So with that said, guys, I'm going to ask you guys to once again go back and read the If World War I Was a Bar Fight. I'm also going to ask you to go ahead and look at the video. Well, you don't have to watch this today. You can save it for later. The history of World War I in 6 minutes. I know I should probably try to get a little bit faster at this. I should probably try to condense mine down to 6 minutes, but there's just so much good stuff to say about the causes of World War I, and I want to be as clear as possible. So if you guys have any questions, let me know, but I'm going to leave you guys with one that you will be answering for me on Google Classroom. Here is your task. I'm going to post this on Google Classroom for you guys. Number 1, what do you think were the long-range causes of the Great War? Remember, World War I was called the Great War when it was actually happening, because World War II hadn't happened yet. So what do you think were the long-range causes, the causes that had been brewing for a long time? Let's see if you've been paying attention. What were the short-term causes? This one should be pretty easy. What were the immediate or short-term causes of the Great War? I want you to give me an example. And lastly, I want you to think about who's to blame for what really happened, how this really all went down, and how it started. If you were to, at this point in the war, just talking about the causes, try to divide blame amongst the countries, who do you think is really responsible for the start of the war? So in Google Classroom, I'm going to have you answer these 3 questions for me and let me know what you think. All right? With that said, I'm sorry guys, I'm a little bit long-winded. I'm going to try to get better at this. No promises. And I will see you later when we talk about the course of World War I. And we're going to read some fascinating World War I trench poetry. Have a great evening, you guys, and I hope you're all well and safe in your homes.